So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just want to let everyone know we are recording. So if you'd like to turn off your camera, you're welcome to do that. I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. And we at the Center acknowledge that the land we're on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native tribes. I want to also begin by thanking the National Endowment for the Arts and the City of Fort Collins Fort Fund Grant for making funds available for the Right to Herself project, which includes the two exhibitions, one at the Lincoln Center Gallery, one at the Clara Hatton Gallery at CSU campus. And then also we have a billboard that's located at Lincoln and Riverside. Tonight, we're going to be talking about women's rights and the body. So the exhibition was basically split into two sections, one addressing women's rights in the land and the other addressing women's rights in the body. And I just want to read something from my co-curator, Dr. Lauren Cross, who couldn't be with us tonight. And she wrote, at the Clara Hatton Gallery, the artists featured speak to the ways in which human rights speak to and or against diverse bodies. To put it another way, artists draw our focus to the ways in which their embodied humanity is impacted as a result of identity. The artists reference themes from labor, gender roles, family, and reproductive history and justice. What I'd like to do tonight is introduce our artists that are going to be speaking. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. Tia Elisa Anthony is an interdisciplinary artist and curator. Their work explores the intersections of ecology, ritual, storytelling through sculpture, photography, collage, and reliquary. While Anthony's research-driven artist practice is an investigation of ritual interspersed in our daily lives, fact with a little fiction, her curatorial practice observes, reimagines, and preserves inclusive spaces for people of color. Susan Sponsler Kartasven earned her Master's of Fine Arts degree in photography from Texas Women's University and was a fellow at the American Photography Institute National Graduate Seminar at New York University. Her work explores issues related to identity, being an Asian American international adoptee, and consists of photo-based artworks, which include cyanotype images on fabric, encaustic paintings, installation, mixed media images, and quilts. Letitia Huckabee has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma, a BFA from the Art Institute of Boston in photography, and her master's degree from the University of North Texas in Denton. She's exhibited at the School of Harlem, the Camden Palace Hotel in Cork City, Ireland, the Texas Biennial at Blue Star, Contemporary Art Museum, and her work is included in several prestigious collections. I don't know if Gabby is with us. Did Gabby join us yet? Anyway, if she joins us, she's an emerging artist born in Bryan, Texas. She just received her master's degree in visual arts at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And she works predominantly in the medium of photography, but also employs other mediums like sculptural, installation, and embroidery. Rochelle Mosman Solano grew up in New York City and works between New York and Panama, the country of her maternal family. Starting often from her biography and family history, Mosman explores how the intersection of history, class, and race formed individual experience. Her work is concerned with the convergence of ideology, mythology, economics, and the psyche through photographs and film that explore narrative as inherent to humanity and shaped by perception. She is a Fulbright and has exhibited all over the United States, New York, and with that, I would like to start our talks. One little piece of housekeeping is if you have questions, we'll have time for questions at the end. Please type them into the chat. You don't need to wait till the end to do that. And I will share my screen with some installation shots of the exhibitions. So Tia, if you would like to go first, please go ahead. Do you want to go ahead first, Tia?
Sure. I was just waiting for you to share your screen. I didn't know.
Okay, got it.
I didn't want to start talking before.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. Hi, everyone. I'm Tia Lisa Anthony. I have explored fine art and photography for quite some time. I am a traditionally trained commercial photographer. I ran a business for 10 years before deciding to relocate back to Colorado, my home, my birthplace. I am a military child, and which equates to traveling the world, experiencing and intertwining in many cultures, and utilizing media as a way to stay connected. I believe in my youth, so that I feel is coming out in the works that are currently on exhibition to Write to Herself. The works are inspired by 1950s Jet magazine imagery, models that were not necessarily celebrity or, famous during the time, or, some say, isn't that X celebrity? And I say, no, it's not. She's a model. I was inspired by the Jet magazine as my parents collected that and recently got rid of it. So I'm brokenhearted, but, with them feeling that they were hoarding, it was one of those things that they let go, which was such a shame because I had just started working on this work, not knowing that they were getting ready to get rid of that stuff. Specifically, I chose the 1950s era as women in, this was the first African-American media outlet magazine that was shared among the masses. So that in itself created for me an opportunity to discuss colorism and complexionism. I kind of put those two things together. And colorism for me is when members of a specific race, I know it's a construct, but members of and identifying as, Black in this case, they place more quality on lighter skin toned African-American women versus the darker skin tone women, especially in the 1950s. We start thinking about, they're putting it out there. These are their first images, and what they want to represent is very European, hairstyles, and even the tone of the skin, and almost a transparency on the covers. These women are essentially removed from their identities and created in this identity based around what media says to be, or that acknowledges as beauty. So the process for these images were, finding the works, finding imagery, printing it out, and transferring that imagery onto surfaces, fabric, paper, exploring those the texture of each individual. And what I kept finding was there was always this removal of their Blackness, of their melanin, of their of culture. And so I started to play with the ideas of drawing within the imagery, where you can see in the far right, African face paint and what that would look like and what that would have represented in the greater conversation if it were held during that time. So there's like this Americanized European, colonist idea, commodification of the Black woman for me in this works primarily. So I started looking at how those images would also be portrayed, overlaid, repeated, repetition, thinking about how media mass produces beauty, how media mass produces ideologies, how they, in so many words, were, I feel, added to the issues of the time. I feel like they added to the issues of complexion or colorism. Colorism, saying the darker skin would be less quality and the lighter skin was much more closely associated with whiteness. So that for me, this came right after some works that I was working with Dr. Paul Hamilton with his African sculptures and masks, placing identity amongst current culture. So people of Denver were placed side by side. So I started to really dig into this idea of, who are we representing, and is there loss in the right for these women to be African American, to really exemplify those nuances, with Black people not being a monolith, and thinking about, women in that, how we can't just represent one portion of our identity, or we're forced to represent other identities to be accepted and to the masses. So I can share my website as well if you'd like, and kind of bring up some more of the images from. Let me move you guys over here. Okay. So recently I just finished my residency at Redline Contemporary Art Center in Denver, where I was exploring collage and inspired primarily from complexion, these layers and ideas of the loaded image and breaking down of intersectionality and those identities. I think, just 1 second. So primarily in my works, I'm also interested in bringing to light those that have been lost in the archives. My internet may be acting up. I'm just going to turn my camera off. I don't know if I can do that at the same time. Stop video. Okay. So the first piece that came out of this series, sorry, I don't know how I put that. It's titled Glitch. And I was really interested in the history of the Black magazine and the fact that there are minimal representation of the Black experience. And now that the magazine has gone out of print and it was attempted to be sold off. No, I think someone just recently purchased the archives from Jet Magazine, and I'm really excited about that because this imagery to me was lost, and I think that is what truly inspires me to see, these images reproduced, and think about appropriation and, specifically how Black women are represented. So Womanist Muse, this is originally an ink on paper 11 by 14, and then it's scanned, and then it's reprinted, and then it's, how do you say this? It's, I've messed with it. But at the inception of the American Dream, once introduced to people of color in 1950s, Black America was misrepresented as a whole by the imagery the magazine produced. Unlike today's Jet Magazine, which is Ebony Magazine, which is filled with wealthy Black celebrities of various skin tones and darker skin tones. In the 1950s, they were printed much fairer skinned women of color donned with European hairstyles, and created a complex relationship between what was acceptable and the reality of Black America. So I think about, the women in my own experience being of mixed races, products of the transatlantic slave trade, where, their skin tones are considered passing for other races. And, that being an actual goal to pass the paper bag test for either side. If you pass the paper bag test, you were accepted by European Caucasian culture. And if you didn't pass the bag test, then you could, continue to stay Black, but then you were considered less than. It's so complex to even consider the racism within a culture, within its own culture. So that I'm challenging my own perception of identity, as well as within the last decade. I realized that I had a body dysmorphia that I'd not known existed, and didn't realize what I look like in the mirror. So this for me is also an opportunity to look at women of the past and how they're represented, and explore those layers. The what happens to identity when it's mass produced, when it's reprinted over and over and over again, which is a part of my practice. What does it say? What comes out of the work? What information is missing? What information was, I started to then remove information. I think that's where I really enjoyed the process, was, removing that context that they were even on the cover of a magazine, and that they were people, and how those, varying ideas, and I believe, the idea of code switching existed way before there was a title for it. So I find that really interesting. And that's my work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your screen and showing us more of that work. I encourage you all to look at Tia's website and her vast amounts of work as well. So let's see, next would be Letitia. Would you like to go, Letitia, and talk about your work?
Sure. I don't know if you have an image of the piece that's in the show, but
I do. I will share my screen again.
So while she's bringing that up, the piece that's in the show, first let me say how honored I am to be amongst all these amazing women in this exhibition. And it was such a pleasure to hear Tia talking about her work. I too am a product of a military family. So I believe they call us third culture kids because we end up picking up stuff from everywhere we go and sort of create our own culture. But my piece is the dress that sort of sculptural formed there to the back of the image. And it's called Placenta Previa, or the birth of Hallelujah. And it came about after the birth of my second child. She's already mentioned my credentials, but I'm married, happily married for 16 years, and we have 3 beautiful children. And I grew up, like I just said, military family, the daughter of an officer and a school teacher. And my husband has an MFA from Yale. And I tell you that not because I'm trying to impress you with my life, but I think it's important for the subject matter of this piece that I'm going to talk about, because it really deals with sort of discrepancies in healthcare for women of color. And it doesn't matter what your background was. You could be celebrity or you could be impoverished, and it's still the same when it comes to healthcare, and particularly for women in giving birth. And so with this piece, as I mentioned, came about after the birth of my second child, and it's called Placenta Previa. So that kind of gives away part of the issue. But before I get into that, I'd like to just read a few statistics. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Black women are 2 to 3 times more likely to give birth prematurely. Black women are 3 times more likely to have low birth weight babies. Why is that? Lack of access for women who don't have the financial means to purchase, or their jobs don't provide health insurance. They're not monitored the same as white women are when they do have health insurance. They're not believed when they report symptoms. They're often sent away from the hospital as if nothing's going on, it's all in your head. There's unconscious bias from medical professionals. And I think this election cycle is proof of that, when we see half of the country so divided in the way we feel about things. And a quarter, 1 out of 4 Black women report disrespect and abuse from medical professionals during their treatment. So those are all statistics. What I would like to do is tell you a little bit about my personal experience as an educated, well-traveled, married Black woman who happens to live in a nice house on 4.5 acres and has 3 beautiful children. So I do want to say that first before I get into all the stuff that may make people upset, that there is a sort of a happy ending. With the birth of our first son, and I will say that all of my pregnancies were beautiful. I loved being pregnant. I had no problems during the pregnancy. All of my issues happened when I was reliant upon the medical professionals, basically. So with our first child, which is our only son, I had a regular pregnancy, and then one day I went in and my blood pressure was a little off. So they said, we want to put you in the hospital and kind of monitor you for a little bit. And the next day they decided that they were going to take the baby. So they were going to induce, not take, I should say, they were going to induce labor. And the doctor asked the nurse to flush me with fluids because they were going to give me Pitocin. Well, the nurse flushed me with Pitocin, and my contractions started coming constantly, and my son's umbilical cord was on his shoulder. So then I had to be rushed in for a C-section. And they drugged me to the point where I was in and out of consciousness. So I only remember a little of the birth of my son in phases. and really didn't get to hold him until the next day. And when I woke up, there was another nurse in the room who was, I guess I would say, chastising me because the baby hadn't been breastfed yet. I was unconscious for 24 hours. And she was basically trying to strong arm me into allowing them to give the baby formula. And I asked her, and she was a white woman, and I asked her, I said, "Did you breastfeed your children?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I breastfed all my children, da, 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 da." And I said, "I'm going to breastfeed mine. Will you bring him to me?" So that was my first child. The second child, beautiful pregnancy, but my placenta was low. And so there was some concern that it might detach. About a month before my due date, I started hemorrhaging at home. And I screamed for my husband, and he came in and saw the blood and rushed me and our 2-year-old son to the hospital like a maniac. And when we got there, we ran in the emergency room and told them that I was pregnant, and I wasn't due for another month, and I had started bleeding. They had us take a seat in the waiting room for about an hour before they called us back to be seen by a professional. I don't think those things would have happened if I had been from another culture. I didn't think I would have any more children after that because it was so traumatic with those 2 births. But eventually we decided we wanted to have one more, and then our family would be complete. Unfortunately, we lost that child, but we were blessed to become pregnant again. And with our daughter, our last daughter, her placenta did start to detach, but because of the issues from my previous pregnancies, they were watching me a little bit closer. And so I went in on a Friday and everything was okay. And when I went in on Monday, the placenta had separated in the center. It was only attached on 2 ends. And they decided they're gonna have to take the baby right away. And with both this delivery and the second one, of which all 3 were C-sections because the first one was a C-section after I got flushed with Pitocin, then it was required for me to have a C-section with every delivery. So I never had an option to naturally deliver after I was flushed with the Pitocin. When I went in for that C-section and the one with my middle child, there was always the anesthesiologist that was in training at my deliveries. And so for the delivery with my third child, he literally stabbed me 5 times in my back before they decided to just deaden me and get the thing over with because he wasn't getting it right. I don't think that would have happened if I had been of another ethnicity, to the point where the nurses in the room were beginning to look at each other like, what in the heck is going on here? So she was delivered. She spent about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks in the NICU, but she's a healthy, beautiful 4-year-old right now. But something I will never forget with her delivery is that when they told me they were going to take her, the doctor said to me, "You may not want her to be taken right now, but it's the best thing for her. You can be mad at me and we'll deal with that later. But there's something I want to tell you. She's got everything going for her. 1, she's a healthy weight. She was 6 pounds at that point. 2, she's a female. And 3, she's Black. And those are the healthiest babies." So according to the medicineworld.org website, data shows that Black baby girls born weighing 2 pounds or less are more than twice as likely to survive as white baby boys born at the same weight when a number of preemies are still too tiny to make it on their own. This was shocking to me because I was thinking to myself, she is what I used to be. I used to be a healthy female baby, the strongest babies born. And yet here are those statistics that I read to you about what happens on the other side when those healthy babies are trying to have a baby and running into all these problems. So the piece in the show included, and it's hard to see with this image, but there are actual hospital gown patches from gowns that I wore when I was in the hospital. They miraculously made it out of the hospital. I'm not going to say how, but I used them in the piece. And then the curtains out of my room with my husband have been cut to the shape of a belly with my husband's hands, sort of cupping the baby. And there's also, if you were able to get close, little bitty patches of like the ultrasound pictures of the children that are stitched into the piece. And there's a quilt that was a quilt that my grandmother made, my great grandmother made, that I photographed and then reprinted out onto fabric, and all of that stitched together. And for me, it's really symbolic of being wrapped in culture and the trauma and all of these things that happen just to bring a baby into this world. So I really liked what was on the website about the write-up about this exhibition. And I'm going to read what it said: that artists draw our focus to the ways in which their embodied humanity is impacted as a result of identity. And so in response to that, I would say, so what I body forth is my Blackness, and that defines my humanity. Whether I'm just trying to buy groceries, whether I'm applying for a job, whether I'm just walking down the street, but even more so, trying to grow my family and just bring a healthy baby into this world. And so you can imagine that with those kind of statistics and those kind of responses, and I'm just one Black woman who's had these experiences across 3 births. You can imagine the stress and the psychological strain that that puts on a woman when she knows that those statistics and she's going into a medical facility to have a baby, not knowing who that is in the white coat across from them and what their beliefs are about her just by looking at her skin. And so this piece, and I'm glad I made it through it without crying, but this piece, Placenta Previa, The Birth of Hallelujah, that's my daughter's name. Her name is Hallie and her middle name is Luya, was really in response to that sort of stress of coming from the healthiest babies to now me, a grown woman, just trying to have a baby. So that's my piece that's in the show. Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry. Thank you for sharing those really personal experiences. And I wish we had a closer image. That dress is incredible.
I
When
have
we
one.
received it
If
and
you let me
unpacked
share
it.
my screen, I might have, yeah, I got
Yeah,
an image that's closer. I can show really quickly.
when we unpacked it, I was in awe. It is so gorgeous.
So this is the piece. I don't know if I can blow it up bigger because it's in preview, but you can see the outline of my belly here and my husband's hands. He's a painter. So all of this pink part is photographs of my great-grandmother's quilt that was printed onto fabric. And I can't turn it around and show you the back, but I think you can almost recognize little patches of hospital gowns that are sewn into it.
It belongs in a museum. I do know that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing those experiences. And I can't imagine what you went through. Now we'd like to hear from Rochelle. You're muted, Rochelle.
Sorry. Let me just bring up, I think it's these 3 images that that are in the show. Let me, sorry. Okay, I'll share my screen too. And um, so the work that I have in the show is work that I made with my mother's collaboration. And it's a series that came after a series about really my mother's family in Panama, and the effect of colonization, not just from Spain, but also from American occupation of Panama. And after making that work for a few years and convincing my mother somehow to come with me to Central America to make the work there, I shifted gears and started exploring this period where basically my mother's side of the family immigrated to the American South. My grandmother had married an American man she had met in Panama, and he brought her to the town he grew up in, which was a very small rural town called Woodstock in Virginia. And I was always my memories of visiting her were just, they felt like, it felt a lot like, it almost felt like a mirroring of what's happening right now in politics and in the country. You know, she was, but different because she was the only Latina in this little town, probably the only brown person in this little town, you know, not black, not white, but brown. And for me, and also didn't speak English. So for me, it was very sort of impressionable because I would visit her from New York City where I lived. And so when I chose to make the work, I was really digging not only into photographs of her experience living there, but also of my own memories of what it felt like to visit her in that town. But it really talks to the experience of my mother's process of immigrating and the transformation of her identity in that process, you know, how she was viewed, how she was perceived, but also how she then began to feel. So the pictures are really about that. So there's more, but I'll just show you these three because I think it's these three that are in the show. To make, well, not this one, but to make this character, I would use parts of my face to sort of juvenate my mother. So it's my mother's body and parts of my face that are on her. And, you know, part of this is sort of my interest in, you know, the connectivity we have through generations to experience, and, you know, the experiences that are passed to us sort of are housed in our body. And also, strangely, even though they're not directly our experiences, come to inform how we then experience things. So yeah, I mean, I think for this work, it became more about ideas around colorism, in part because of American history, and it's, you know, it's the history of segregation and the segregation that was brought to Panama, but then in the experience of living through that in the mid 60s, you know, in a southern town, took on new meaning. So yeah, yeah, there's more I can say, but maybe someone has questions later that I could answer. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you for that, Rochelle.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think our next artist would be, oh, sorry, I went out of order. Susan, are you ready to share about your work?
Yes. Um,
I
let's see
can
how-
I can share my screen and the installation shots that are on the website,
Okay.
unless you prefer to share your screen.
Well, I have, let's see. I can do it either way.
Up to you.
Okay, I've got some images. Yeah, I can share it on my screen.
Okay, I just made you co-host.
Okay. 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 So can you see the Photoshop image?
Yes.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to start with Maybelle. When I started thinking about this show, um, I started thinking about the right to vote for women because the show was so close to the time of this election, and I was interested in how Asian women got the vote, and so I did a little bit of research, and I found Maybelle Pinghua Lee. She lived in New York City, and she was only 16 when she protested in New York in the 1912 suffrage parade. She was on horseback leading the parade. She was a member of the Women's Political Equality League, and in 1915 gave an important speech titled China's Submerged Half, which was covered by the New York Times. And she said that the welfare of China and possibly its existence as an independent nation depends on rendering tardy justice to its womankind. For no nation can ever make real and lasting progress in civilization unless its women are following close to its men, if not actually abreast with them. And I thought it was interesting how far-sighted she was at such a young age. She had graduated early and she was on her way to Barnard College, and she did earn her PhD from Columbia University in 1921 and became the first Chinese American woman to obtain that degree in economics. She was protesting on behalf of women to obtain the vote, even though at that time there was no possibility for her to vote, as she, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which did not allow Chinese people to become citizens at that point. When I was growing up in a small town in Iowa, my brother and I were the only two Asians in the community, and I felt relatively accepted because my parents had lived in that community for a long time. And I know my brother felt a lot more probably prejudice from other young people in the area. And then when we traveled to sports events and things like that, again, we were the only Asian people in the audience. So people weren't openly prejudiced, but it definitely had an impact on our lives. And then when I moved to Texas, outside of my cocoon of family, you know, my identity as Asian became more pronounced in my mind, and based on the situations I'd find myself in. so I identified with Maybelle, and then Tai Long Schultz was the first Asian Chinese woman to vote in 1917, and she lived in California. So she was able to cast a vote at the age of 24. And at age 12, she had run away from home because her family was going to force her into an arranged marriage. And so she ended up in a mission home helping save girls from brothels. She became the first Chinese American woman to pass the civil service examination and receive a federal service position as an interpreter on Angel Island. And we don't know about Maybelle if she was ever able to vote, but Maybelle was, Tai was the first to vote, first Chinese woman to vote. And then, of course, in 1920, there was the 19th Amendment, which allowed women to vote throughout the United States. New York and California got the right to vote for women before the rest of the US. And then as an immigrant, I realized when I was doing my research for these two pieces that when I was adopted, it was shortly before I was adopted that adopted children from foreign lands were able to become naturalized citizens. That, I believe that was the McCarran Act, and that was around 1954. And so I came at just the right time. I was born in 1958, and then when I was naturalized citizen, I was 3.5 years old. And at that point, then I became eligible to vote when I turned 18. So it was women like this that allowed me the right to vote as an immigrant, and other women as well. So I think that's it. Anyone has questions?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
What you didn't see in the images that she shared is that those are quite large and printed on Kozo paper. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a kind of actual rice paper.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. Gabby, are you interested in talking about your work?
Yes, I'm so sorry I'm late. My lights went out in the whole apartment complex, and I was like, no, I need to be on right now. I'm so sorry. But yeah, we could share the images if you have any for me, and if not, I think I have some.
I do.
Okay, because my installation will be different than the installation you guys have.
Actually, there's artists from both galleries, and some of the artists have images in both galleries, but I'm going to share my screen now to the installation shots.
For sure. So, hi everybody, my name is Gabby Magali. So my work, here's my work. So my work has to do with a lot I'm the first generation Mexican American woman. And where is it that I stand as a Mexican and American woman? I'm not Mexican enough. I'm neither Mexican enough or American enough. So being raised in a very machismo household, which is machismo means a very toxic masculinity, and a very Marianismo household, which means a woman that has to be submissive to their husband and be obedient and just essentially be the mother and be a Virgin Mary. So I questioned that a lot growing up. and I always was a rebel because I always answered back to my dad because he always told me, you have women belong in the kitchen. They have to be a mother at this age. They have to be married. That's essentially our role in life. And I always was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And it was weird because my mom was the opposite. My mom was very, she was like, you're going to go to school. You're going to get an education. I don't care how we're going to do it. You're going to get an education. And I don't want you to be, my mom was forced to be married at the age of 18. So she's like, I'm going to give you, you have the freedom to marry whomever you like. And to my dad, that was very, it was weird because I had one that was very strict about the stereotypes or whatever they want on women. And then my mom was like, no, you're going to be independent. And you're not going to depend on a man. You don't need any of that. Like, I want you to make your own money. A man can't take away your education, your money, none of that. So it was really weird. It was a push and pull. So I decided to, when I left my house, when I went to grad school, I decided to cut my dad out of my life 100% because he was very toxic. It was very negative on me. So on the shirt, I speak Spanish and I speak English. And my dad controlled how I spoke. I could only speak to him in Spanish. So over time, I'm kind of losing my Spanish a little bit. But these embroidered images embroidered pieces of fabrics that I have. So that shirt says, in an ironic way, it's in Spanglish, but in an ironic way, I thank you that you were never there in my life. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. What did it say? In an ironic way, I thank you that you were never there. You made a stronger and more independent woman that doesn't take shit from nobody, not even from her own father. So that took a very long time to embroider. And then I have a dress laid out that's for my mom, and that one I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what I said to my mother. I said, "Ama, thank you for raising me to be independent and different from past generations. You instilled in me to never depend on a man. I thank you for all the sacrifices you made because you gave me the opportunity to dream. I'm doing this for you since you never had the chance." And then on the wall, I was raised Catholic, and there's a lot of Bible verses in the Bible that are very sexist. So I decided to flip them on their head, and then on those really itty bitty little like crosses that says "Wives, don't submit to your husband," because there is a Bible verse, unfortunately, that does say "Wives, submit to your husband," and I'm like, why do we need to submit to our husband? What the hell? So this is essentially just an installation of what I would see in my everyday household and how I wanted to challenge that, how I wanted it to be different, how I want to hopefully one day present this shirt to my dad, even though he will probably receive it, but he will never emotionally understand it. And then also I embroidered these clitoris on the anatomy of the clitoris on these beautiful like placemats. And this one's called, oh my goodness, what did I call this one? I can't remember the top of my head. Are you, dinner is served, obviously playing off the whole tongue in cheek of like eating a girl out, or the fact that to this day, not a lot of, it's a joke kind of also where men don't know where the clitoris is at. So it's me kind of just poking fun of that a little bit. But overall, my work just has to deal with where I stand as a woman now and how do I cut myself away from the patriarchy of my father and the toxic masculinity of what it is to be raised in a machismo household. So yeah.
So that was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you made it.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm just running through some, let's see, some of the other installation pieces. Oh, one of the things that I don't know if you've seen, but so this is in the Lincoln Center Gallery. They have a little lobby gallery, and these are some of Letitia's work that is under glass. They're vintage flour and sugar sacks, and then interspersed are the Smithsonian posters about women, the right to vote, but it's talking about the history and about Indigenous women and different groups, timelines and different things. back to artists here. I wonder if we have questions from the audience, or if the artists have questions for each other, comments, questions. I mean, you all talked about really, really interesting and personal things about your lives and your work. Thoughts?
Well, I've been sharing in the chat with Letitia, my experience as a Black woman, as a Black mother, and these stories that we're sharing, they're just not being shared. They're on the, I gave birth at 15. I was given 18 stitches, torn ligaments throughout my pelvis area. Nothing was ever checked. They didn't want to do a cesarean on me because what Letitia said, once you have a cesarean, then you must continue. But it was interesting. I gave birth to my second daughter, and, I started to have contractions where I was probably just dehydrated, and they induced me 2.5 weeks early and said because I had another child that she would be fine. So it kind of gave her, it took away that time within the womb. Those 2.5 final weeks are just as important as the entire gestation period. And then I shared the final story that, unfortunately I had an abortion at a very young age, and I wasn't given the medication that I was supposed to receive until the end of the procedure. And because the anesthesiologist, right, didn't know, couldn't get whatever that was mentioned. And I think that, I think we need to share these stories much more and openly. And I'm really proud of myself for not crying. I really appreciate that, and sharing this with a room full of women that, I'm having the pleasure of meeting and sharing this work with. So I just, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's the stories that just don't get told, like you were saying. I think, and I mentioned this to you in the chat, I think it's easier for us to discuss in society how Black men are abused, how they're imprisoned, and this and that. And that conversation happens all the time. And we see it in artists' work all the time. But this sort of issue with Black women and the medical profession just gets hushed over. It's kind of like when we talk about slavery, nobody wants to talk about how the Black woman's body was used then as well. We can discuss the field, we can discuss the whippings, we can discuss all that, but somehow when it comes to the Black woman's body, then this society in particular just kind of shuts down.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I think that that's really important. And one of the things that I was happy was, that it was included in this exhibition. There's some, some of the pieces that I'm just going to share this. So if you look in the forefront where you see the speculum, and there's some other pieces that are, so there's the speculum here, looking at the history of women's gynecological instruments, and how problematic that is historically, that in the ways that Black women were used by doctors to experiment. That there were all these horrific things that happened that don't get talked about enough about. So how do we make that happen so that people understand, and that and the medical, really it's medical intervention. It needs to be at a institutional level within the medical system. Not that I need to tell you that, but
I agree. I agree.
yeah. Does anyone have any questions about the work, for any of our fantastic artists? We have a question from Bonnie asking, she'd like to know more about Susan's process. In other words, about layering, and are there words incorporated in that process?
I do print the images on Kozo paper that I have altered by staining it with rust. I did that. I wanted it to have the feeling as if it came from the 1920s. And I did use words in the piece about Tai Lung Schultz. I put the year that she voted, and I believe her name is in the piece as well. Let's see. And then in the end, I decided to coat them with encaustic to try to seal the paper and protect the images. It also, the encaustic also gives a sense of history, I think, to the images. It changes the color slightly.
Yeah, they're very rich. There's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of the texture and the different layers of toning, or the other processes you use, or make them very rich and very compelling.
Thank you.
And Bonnie, you're here in Fort Collins, so I hope you're going to go see it in person. So, so Bonnie is saying she's curious if all these women feel that their work can make a difference, can hopefully make a difference, and how.
I know, Gabby, you can think about it for a second. I hope that my work allows people, women specifically, to do a self-check, do a pulse check, and see where you are with yourself. I think that there is an opportunity for other races to, I hate that. So we just have to break down these systemic structures, and if that means doing it from within, I think that's where we start. So I think that's where we make the change. I think, presenting these stories and presenting these narratives and presenting the work from a genuine place, as we all are, and from, I think that is what helps and will help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and telling these stories, I mean, just the fact of telling them and making them available to the audience is so important, and in a way that is immediate, right? It's like the statistics that Letitia gave. It's so important, the statistics, but then to see the artwork, to see that dress, to be able to look at it closely and look at the way that that all incorporates. It affects your who you are as a human. Like, you're able to bring that into yourself, and of course, that's why art is so important. Did you want to speak to that, Gabby?
I was gonna say, like, I'm listening to everyone's story. I know I jumped in late, and to hear what you guys are saying, I really am happy to be a part of such an amazing group of like women that are being vulnerable and so strong at the same time. And like that to me is something something I thank y'all for letting me be a part of this, because it's very hard to find a safe space and to talk about these things. And I was going to add to the fact that, like, about my work, when it comes to hopefully I make a difference, at the end of the day, I just want my work to resonate with young um, Latinas or young Mexican American girls, anyone that can relate to it essentially. But I just want young girls at a younger age to realize that they are strong and they're independent and they don't need a man in their life, that they could do this all on their own. And that they, how can you say it? They don't come off as a B word. They don't come off because I've been called that by my own dad because I have stood up against him. Like, you need me. And it's like, no, we don't need you. I never have needed you. And I haven't needed you these past 5 years that I've cut you out of my life. And that's the thing about, in, I think in every culture really, but especially in the Mexican culture, we're very big about family. And by me cutting him out, it's been a big negative thing on me because I look mean, I look rude because I want to cut them out. But at the end of the day, I'm much more happier now that I have been able to cut them out. So that's what I hope to get out of my work with people, that they do see that, hey, you could cut a negative person out of your life and actually be happy at the end of the day. Yes, you're gonna upset people, but like, it's your life. So why try to make other people happy? So that's what I would hope one day, my work. And then I saw another question. As to looking at your embroidery pieces, I immediately think about the idea of labor, specifically domestic labor and emotional labor. Is there part of that in your work? And I especially for sure, my great grandma, she would actually embroid and she would actually crochet a lot just to make a living in Mexico. So that's how she was able to sustain like her family, just to be able to sell little doilies and all this stuff. So when I found that out, to me, I was like, I really connected. I know embroidery work is a very feminine thing to do, but when I heard that about my great grandma, to me, I was like, I connected it to it even more, and I feel like it is something that I tried to learn because women are supposed to know these things, and my great grandma didn't teach me these things, so I had to YouTube a lot of it, which is a great tool. But I did learn a lot on the way there. Like, it was kind of weird because it was very painful. My fingers did end up hurting over the 2 weeks that I was embroidering. And I was thinking about, yes, it was physical pain, but it was a lot of emotional pain that I did feel when I was embroidering this letter to my dad. And I did cry because finally I was able to release all this baggage and hatred and emotion that I did have towards him. And so I did was able to like release that. So yes, I think there's a lot of domestic labor and emotional labor that was put into that shirt and dress.
You know, it's the talk we did last week with Karen Ann Hoffman, who is she's from the Oneida Nation, and we were talking about women, you know, quote unquote women's work and embroidery and beading and things, and she was saying that in their culture, it's not women's work or men's work, that it's you know, considered artistic, and that men who have artistic qualities and tendencies are considered good mates because they have that. So it's interesting in how different cultures view that. I think a talk I went to a while ago, one of the women was saying that toxic masculinity, that the traditional masculinity was just included in the what is it, the MSR? I forget the name of the the book of psychology. As
DMS, the DMS, I think.
Yeah,
yeah, right, that's right. You know about these things. That it was just entered as a diagnosis, and that it was you know, considered extremely harmful or something to that effect, which I thought was really interesting. But
Wow. Well, I have to say that my husband came home from work and immediately started dinner and like changed laundry. So I think we're doing the work over here. And while I'm having this amazing artist talk that he's supporting, yeah, there's hope.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I mean, of course, it's not, we're not, it's not all men, but it is a tendency. I mean, that's one of the things they're talking about with COVID, right? That the burden of childcare and a lot of the home, being home and the work that needs to be done there is falling to women, and that women, a lot of women, especially academic women, are falling behind because of that. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Did anyone else want to speak to that notion of how you want your work to affect, or I'm sorry, what was the question was? It's lost in my feed now. Well, Katie's asking, a couple of you mentioned mythology as an influence in your work. And could you speak to that?
I definitely can. As a child of sharecroppers and women of the South, it was definitely, a part of my upbringing. It was very secretive. It was very hush hush, but the kitchen witches and the I think is very prevalent in my culture. So as far as mythology is concerned, I lean heavily toward the tarot, which is kind of like me pushing the envelope of dealing with European imagery, castles, etc., and placing people of color within those environments and those landscapes. So I guess, yeah. So, and then the ritual, right? So that everything that we do within our everyday has become a part of self-care for me. So that's like self-care and ritual and productivity and being home, having that responsibility to maintain peace and sanity and balance. So that all comes out in my work, as inspiration.
Anyone else like to speak about mythology? Trying to see if we have any other questions. Bonnie, sorry, I realize you're a different Bonnie than I was thinking that you are. So Bonnie, there's a Bonnie here in town whose last name is similar, but Bonnie is actually this Bonnie tonight is actually in Dallas. So it's not, you aren't so close. Well, it's been really nice to hear from everyone. And I hope that we have a couple of more questions from the audience, but we will have a closing reception at the Lincoln Center Gallery. Right now we have Anne Soul Sister Johnson will be giving a talk about her work. She has work in both shows, and Pete Sands, who is a Navajo singer, director, and actor, will be speaking about the video that he made with the Martin sisters. He's doing a documentary on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And the video that plays in the Lincoln Center Gallery with the dancing and singing by the Martin sisters, he directed that. And so he's going to be speaking about that. And we might have a couple of other artists joining us for that closing. So any last words from anyone? I think you all. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think one of the questions was do we think our work would make a difference? And I truly hope so. When I started my work, it was out of a hope to see work by other Asian adoptees or international adoptees, and knowing that some of the feelings that I had about being from Asia, but not, not being fully Korean. I didn't grow up in a Korean household. So that gives me kind of a weird, I think somebody said, I think Gabby said, you're not quite Mexican enough. You're not quite American enough. I kind of fit in that category of, I'm never quite Asian enough. I'm never quite fully American. And so I hope my work does encourage other adoptees to look more openly at their ancestry. And my work is not really pro or against adoption. I had a very good experience. I am very close with my family. Some of the adoptee artwork that I've seen is very negative towards adoption, and that's their experience. So I respect that. But also I was going to say that Letitia and Taya's stories about maternal care in the hospital systems for African-American women is, I never have heard those kinds of stories before. And I think that it's very important for those kinds of stories and talks to be told. And, I think the more people that know about, hopefully the more change will happen.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Someone asked if the show will travel. That's a hope. There was some talk of it, but nothing definite yet. So if you'd like to offer a place to show the work, we can make that happen. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. We will be putting all the recordings together so that people can watch them, over later. We're putting together a sort of an educational pod that will have the artist statements and the catalog, which is being produced, and then the different videos. So hopefully people that are interested in this topic can spend time with the information that's being shared through the artwork and through the talks. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. And maybe I'll see you next week. I guess that's next week. All right. Please stay safe, stay healthy. It's a scary time for people in the United States, and so let's all just take care of each other. Wear your mask. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.